Welcome to Check In with Jason Lauritsen, where we explore how to create human, connected workplaces that employees love and that fuels organizational success. This week, we're doing something a little different. This week and next week's episodes will be solo episodes where I'm going to share some tips and some advice with you for how you can be actively creating a more connected human experience for your team or for your organization. As you know, normally I invite a guest on here to talk about their work, and we kind of dive in and explore that for learnings and inspiration. But based on the conversations I've been having lately and some of what I have been observing about what's happening broadly, it felt like good timing to sit down and bring you this content, because I think what I'm going to share with you today is perhaps some of the most powerful insights or advice I have to offer you if you want to really connect with your people. And so in today's episode, what I'm going to share with you are the 5 best check-in questions for leaders. Now, if you've been following my work for any length of time, you know that check-ins are kind of a big deal to me. I talk about check-ins a lot. And so today we're going to talk about 5 questions for 5 different types of check-ins that you can have as a leader. But before we get into that, I need to remind you, if you haven't heard me talk about how to have an effective check-in conversation, that there are 4 steps. Any effective check-in conversation has 4 steps. And if you follow these 4 steps, you can have more meaningful conversations with your people. You can more quickly get to the conversations that really matter. And the 4 steps are this. Number 1 is ask a great question. It's the first step of any effective check-in. It's also where we tend to mess up because we ask questions like, how are you? That elicit responses that don't really tell us anything, don't get us into a conversation. People say fine or good or busy or whatever, but it's really kind of transactional and doesn't tell you anything. And so the first step to have a meaningful check-in is to ask a great question. And a great question is one that invites a response to the question that almost demands or requires that you follow up, because the whole idea is to get into a conversation. So step 1, ask a great question. Step 2 then is, of course, to follow up. Ask the follow-up question, because that's where the good stuff will come. So you ask that, use your curiosity, and you ask the follow-up question. Step 3 then is to really listen. Listen to what they're saying, listen to what they're not saying, pay attention to their body language, right? Active listening, use your eyes to see what's going on. And then step 4, after you have had your conversation, is to offer support and encouragement. That's how you close out any effective check-in conversation. So 4 simple steps to guarantee that any check-in conversation you have, whether it's with your direct reports or if you're having a check-in with somebody in your personal life, your kids or your spouse or your friend, that it will have an impact, right? That you'll have a conversation that matters. So let's get into what I want to share with you today are 5 questions, 5 great questions that will help you have some different kinds of check-ins. And each one of these kinds of check-ins is important, particularly important as a leader in the work context, as a manager of people. And each of them are a little bit unique. They're a little different, and they'll help you, where you apply them depends on the kind of conversation that you need to have with people on that day. So the first question is kind of the universal Swiss Army knife check-in question that can be used in one-on-one conversations with your people at work. It can be used in almost any context with almost anybody. And it is this. It's taking that question I said earlier, this question that we generally use that isn't a great question, how are you? And turning it into a great question by saying, how are you on a scale from 1 to 10? 10 being couldn't be better, 1 being couldn't be worse. Slight change, but by adding that 1 to 10 scale, it becomes a great question, because now when they answer the question, they give you some information that you can then follow up on, that you can ask the follow-up question about. So if they, say that they're a 7, you say, wow, that's great. Sounds pretty good. I mean, tell me about what's going on. So 7 sounds like there's more good than bad. What has been going well lately? And then they will start telling you what's going well lately or what they're feeling good about, what's on the positive side of the ledger. And then you can ask, another follow-up question, which might be, well, you're at a 7. What would move you up to a 9? Or what's the sort of the gap or what's missing between a 7 and being at a 9 or a 10? And then they'll tell you the things maybe that they're struggling with, or the things that maybe aren't going as well, or the things that they're not as happy about. And you get some really interesting information. And so that 1 to 10 scale really takes this otherwise bad question and turns it into a great question, because it gives you access to have a really meaningful conversation where you kind of cut to the things that actually matter. So when you ask that question, if somebody says they're a 9 or a 10, right? Obviously, their things are probably going fairly well. You ask them what's going well. That's an opportunity to learn about them, to celebrate whatever's going well. If they're at a 2 or a 3, that's a cry for help. They're clearly struggling. And if they're telling you that they're at a 2 or a 3, that's a sort of an invitation for you to step into that with them and ask them about it, and to have a conversation to see, what kind of support maybe you can offer or provide to them. So question number 1, how are you on a scale from 1 to 10, right? That is the universal check-in question. And like I said, you can use that at work, in your personal life, kind of everywhere. That works with virtually anyone. The second question, and this is another great question, but it's for a very different kind of context. This is a great check-in question to use at the beginning of a more formal one-on-one conversation, or maybe it's a more formal sit down to talk about performance, or to sit down to talk about development. Doesn't matter, but this is a little bit more of a formal question to ensure that in that conversation that you're about to have, that you make sure you talk about the things that need to be talked about. And so the question is, what's the most important thing we need to talk about today? I recommend that this is the first question of any one-on-one conversation that a manager or leader has with their people. When I started using this question many, many years ago, what I found was it really improved the quality of the one-on-one meetings I was having with people, because oftentimes, both of us had a list of things that, we would have kind of gone through and updated each other about, the typical one-on-one. And maybe we would have never even gotten to the thing that really needed to be talked about. And then what happens is at the very end of the meeting, when you're out of time, one of you, either the employee or you as the manager, would be like, well, I really needed to talk to you about this, or this is something we need to talk about. Or the employee would say, well, by the way, one of the things I was hoping we could talk about today is I got a call from a recruiter and I'm really, conflicted over what I should do about it, right? Whoa, wait a minute. Or they'll give you an update about something that's going on, like, hey, I just want to let you know that my wife got diagnosed with cancer. And so I'm going to have a lot on my plate, both outside of work and at work over the next, however long. You don't want that to be the last thing, right? If there's something like that needs to be talked about, it needs to be first. And so when you say, what's the most important thing we need to talk about? And if both of you know that's coming, so the employee knows that question's going to be asked and you know that that's going to be where you're going to start, then both of you might come in and you both might have the same thing or different things that need to be talked about. And you might spend your entire time together talking about that. And guess what? That's okay, because that is the conversation that matters that day. So that's question number 2. Question number 3 is sort of gets at one of the most important drivers of employee engagement and performance, and that is recognition and appreciation. We know that, we have decades of data that tells us that employees, in order to be fully engaged and to be giving their best, need to feel appreciated for their contribution. They need to feel valued at work. And so this question was one that was inspired for me by The book, How Full Is Your Bucket? If you have not read that, it's a really great book on this topic. It was written 20 or so years ago by some of the folks at the Gallup organization based on some of the data they were seeing in all of the employee engagement data that they collect from employees. And that they saw this big gap that employees were feeling very underappreciated, underrecognized at work. And so one of the tools that they have in the book is an appreciation kind of questionnaire, sort of or a recognition questionnaire that you can use with your team, or you can use with individual folks on your team. And it had a lot of interesting questions to kind of help you as a leader understand the individual preferences from each employee, because not everyone wants to be recognized the same way. Not everybody feels appreciated in the same way. And so it helps you get at that. I always loved that, but now I have distilled it into, there's one question that you can use kind of on a periodic basis. In addition to that, I would highly recommend using that approach. But if you want to check in with people occasionally to just see where they're at and try to identify if there's any gaps around how they're feeling, if they're feeling underappreciated or valued, here's this question. So question number 3 is, on a scale from 1 to 10, how appreciated do you feel for your contribution at work? On a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, 1 being the lowest, how appreciated do you feel for your contributions at work? Now, this is a pretty meaty question, and it might take them a minute to think about this. They might say, 8 or 9, that'd be great. That would be great. I think more likely you're going to hear a number that's lower on the spectrum. And then this is where you channel your curiosity. Once they give you a number, just say, hey, tell me more about that. Or, help me understand what makes you feel appreciated. What kind, where do you feel like you have contributions that maybe are being overlooked or undervalued or underappreciated, right? You get into some really incredible conversation there that will help you as a leader then make some adjustments, make some calibrations to ensure that going forward that you're not missing things, that you don't have blind spots. And so this is a really important conversation to have. You don't need to have this one every month, but it's something I would do with each team member if I were you once or twice a year, just to see how they're doing. Because it's very easy for us, particularly as busy as it is and as much chaos as we have going on around us in the broader world and often at work, it's easy to overlook making sure people feel appreciated and recognized. So this is an opportunity for you to check in and then make adjustments. Number 4 is a question about career development. There's all kinds of conversations we can have about career development. We know that career development is incredibly important to retaining and engaging talent, particularly early career talent. What is more important than my opportunity to learn and grow? And we also know that, depending on your background, depending on your past experience, depending on your age, your expectations of career growth can be really different. Generationally, we see differences in terms of our, how impatient we are about career growth, and we need to be able to respond to that and manage that as leaders. And so this question is one that helps you do that. So question number 4 is, how would you rate your career growth over the past year on a scale from 1 to 10? 10 being it was perfect, exactly what I expected. 1 being wasn't anywhere close to what I had expected or hoped for. Now, you might feel a little bit of angst about asking that question, right? Because what if they say 1? What if they say 2? What if they are unhappy with their career growth? Well, whether you know about it or not, that is how they feel. Like, their perception is their reality. And so not knowing just means you cannot do anything about it. You cannot engage them in a conversation about it. And so asking this question allows you to peek in and sort of see what's going on. How are they feeling about career growth? If it's going great, that's great. Then you ask some follow-up questions about what feels good to you, what has felt helpful, where do you see progress, right? To really understand the things that are most meaningful to them. And you'll be able to kind of dial into the things that are really speaking to them or that seem to be having impact. If it's on the lower end of the scale, then you can ask, well, talk to me about that. What were you hoping was going to happen this year? Where are we not making progress that you would like to be making more progress? What kinds of things would you like to see more of? What kinds of opportunities would you be interested in? And you can have that conversation to unpack it. And so this is a really powerful question to dig into sort of where they're at relative to their developmental expectations and their developmental goals, so that you can, do one of two things. You can either respond, maybe they aren't getting the opportunities they should be, and you can fix that. That could be something that you could create for them or help them connect to. Or maybe they have some unrealistic expectations about what's coming their way or how fast it should be coming their way. And you can have a conversation about that and managing that. But don't be afraid of the conversation, because it's better to have the conversation and engage them in that conversation, because perhaps you can do something, versus not engaging them and then having them leave you over some assumption that maybe they made that you just never knew about and weren't able to manage. And then the fifth question is one of my favorites. And this question, I would say, is one that it's actually a series of questions, and it's where you use it and how you use it is important. This one I call the 3H check-in. And the 3 H's are the way it's 3 questions. And basically it's how's your head, how's your heart, how's your health? So it's a sort of a well-being check-in, 3H check-in. And this one is one, certainly you have to pick and choose your spots when you use it. If you have a pretty close-knit group that you work with, they know each other pretty well, have been together for a while, you have some baseline of trust, then this is a really great question, like at the beginning of the week when you're doing a team huddle or a team meeting, to kind of see where everybody's at heading into the week. How's your head? Head is about kind of, are you challenged? What are you thinking about, right? Do you have things you're trying to puzzle out? How's your heart is really about, and how's your head is mental health as well. How's your heart is really kind of emotional well-being. Where are you at? How are you feeling emotionally? Are you conflicted? Do you have things going on that would be helpful to share, or just to let people know kind of where your baseline is? And then how's your health is a check-in just broadly on how are you feeling? Is there anything going on that is affecting your energy or your ability to show up? The 3H check-in is really a way to level set and find out how people are showing up to this conversation or to this meeting or to this sort of project kickoff or whatever it is. It's an incredible way to allow people to sort of put out on the table anything that they want other people to know about, or that maybe are things that others in the room could potentially support them around or give them extra grace about. It's a very powerful tool. And once people, the first time or first couple of times that you do it with a group or with an individual, it might feel a little uncertain because it takes a minute to kind of work through it. The thing is not to get hung up in the difference between head and heart and health, because sometimes, a lot of times somebody will say, well, my head and my heart are very intertwined today because here's what's going on, or they're very interconnected. Or sometimes it's like my head's great because I've got this great project and I've been doing this, or I've been reading about some really interesting things, and I'm just like, my brain's on fire and I feel very stimulated, but my heart is very conflicted because my dog has been sick and I'm really worried. And so that's how it works out. And that's incredible information to have as you are trying to support people and help them be their best and have their best energy at work. So that 3H check-in, really powerful. I love it as if you have regular check-ins with friends or colleagues that maybe you don't see all the time, but that you want to have a really meaningful conversation with, starting that conversation with a 3H. I have found that to be a really wonderful way to sort of quickly get into, sharing about the things that actually matter in our lives. So that's Number 5, the 3H check-in. Now, before I leave you, actually, I'm going to give you a bonus question. So I told you 5. I'm going to give you a 6th one as a bonus. And this one is one that scares people often a little bit. But again, it's one that wouldn't you rather know than not know? And it's one of those things that could open up a really powerful conversation. It is in the spirit of a stay interview. If you've heard about stay interviews, which is, kind of like rather than waiting for someone to quit and then asking them why they left, you interview the people that are with you about why they stay. This kind of sits in the middle. And you have to have a degree of trust and confidence with the people you ask this one to. The best people to have this conversation with are your top performers or the people that you really depend on, that you want to make sure you're taking care of. And so here's the question. Bonus question is this. If you were to ever consider leaving for another job, and I hope you aren't even thinking about it, and I hope that we can keep you here as long as we can. But if you were ever to consider leaving, what do you think would be the reason for leaving? Now, some people will tell you, you shouldn't ask that. That'll get them thinking about leaving. And I think that's nonsense. I think people are thinking about this kind of thing all the time. We're considering it. And when you do this, it invites people to pause. It invites people to reflect. And then whatever they say is something you should pay very close attention to. Maybe they would say something like, this would have been me. If I'd have been asked this question a couple of times earlier in when I was in corporate, I might have said, well, my plans for myself, what I see in the future is I want to get promoted once or twice over the next 5 years. And, it doesn't seem that you're going anywhere as my boss. And so if you're not going anywhere and I don't want to move into another department, I don't have any place to move up. I'm kind of stuck. Right? That might be a conversation. Now, if that was what your person said to you, if an employee said that to you, boy, that's good to know. And it's good to know 2 years or 3 years in advance, because maybe you can start working on a plan. You can start working on another alternative or another path to keep this person in the organization. Maybe you can create something for them. Or in my case, this was a real thing. I had a conversation not unlike this at one point. And when I said this to my boss, she said, okay, don't leave, don't make any plans, because she said, there's more stuff you should know. Turns out she was planning to retire within the next few years. And so there actually was going to be an opportunity there that I didn't know about. So that might be what happened. Maybe maybe they have some kind of plans coming up and financially they want to continue to increase their compensation by some level, and they're not sure that they can see that path in the organization. Maybe, who knows, right? Maybe there's a certain kind of flexibility. Maybe they're planning to move somewhere, or maybe someday that they have a spouse that maybe is going to move somewhere. Regardless, you want to know about this, right? Because it's there. And if this is one of your best people, you don't want them leaving you. You certainly don't want them to leave without you knowing about any of this. And oftentimes these are not things that are necessarily gripes. They're generally things that are, when they look at it, it's like, well, this kind of opportunity is missing, or I don't see this path, or it would be because of this. Whatever they say, that's something that now is, you put that on your radar. And then you can have a conversation. Well, what would that look like, right? Do you think there is an alternate? You can kind of probe about it and understand why it's important and why it matters. And then you are equipped as a leader to do something about it. So that is the bonus question. Use that with your, high potential, high performance folks that you want to make sure you don't lose. So those are, I promised 5. I gave you 6 of the best check-in questions that you can use as a leader. These questions are great questions because when you ask them, they will invite a response that then allows you to be curious and to learn a whole bunch about what's really going on with your people and to get into the conversations that actually matter for them and for you, so that you can help support them more effectively and you can more successfully unlock their performance. So I hope you have found a couple of these questions that have thrown sparks for you and that you're intending to go use them right away. I promised you that if you do, your people will thank you for it, and you'll notice an impact in their performance. So go forth, and check in, and I'll see you next time.